Its evolution took place because of the existence of one rogue soldier, a man known only as G. However, that's all we were able to retrieve.
Chaos! What's up, my archfiends of chaos? This is your Chaos Rose Gaming Only, Gazer Gaming Only, Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy. Let's get on to this theory. Now, I want to talk about the very first place for Deepground, the very first Deepground base ever created, which was started as a medical facility. And the reason why I know this is you talked to one NPC in DIRGE of Cerberus. One WRO soldier picked up some of Scarlet's data, since Scarlet runs Deepground. And as you've seen in episode Yuffie, she commands Deepground. So, there is one facility that Genesis was taken. The project known as Project G, or the madman they call G, is actually Genesis. As well, you know that Shinra has scrapped Genesis and Geo's files, so it's like they no longer exist, but Genesis still exists. So Genesis is actually the sample that made the Soviets as strong as they are. They took cells from Genesis and put them in an undisclosed laboratory. Now, we've been in this laboratory in the remake before. If you remember the mission in chapter 13, that is actually a Dirge of Cerberus. That is actually a Dirge of Cerberus, directly a Dirge of Cerberus reference. And this was the medical facility that wounded Wutai soldiers and even injured soldiers on the Shinra side went to be experimented on and got turned into Deepground. Stuck with Mako energy in their suits in order to live. So if they took off their suits, they would be screwed, pretty much. Which is, you know that if you play Dirge of Cerberus. I can't help but talk about Dirge of Cerberus because it's one of my favorite spin-offs. This is one of the reasons why I also like the remake of Final Fantasy VII better, because it not just only encompasses the classic Final Fantasy VII with a compilation as well, and I love the compilation. Now I'm going to stop rambling about how much I love the remake better than I do the original 7. And get back on topic. But this was actually the very first, the Shinra secret facility that Barrett references is Deepground. It's the first Deepground base. It's the very first one. The medical bay that became. This is where the experiments took place. This is where Weiss, Nero, Azul, and Rosso, Shell came later on, got G cells, and that's what made them so strong above the other Deepground soldiers. This is when Weiss at Crisis Core says that This subject is for us to become our brother. It meant it in more of a genetic sense. Genesis' cells is what makes Weiss, Nero, Rosso, and Azul so strong. This is the place that took. This is where it took place, under the slums, Sector 7, unbeknownst to anyone. Even people in the slums didn't know about this until we find out later on. Once we had to go find Wedge, because Wedge fell into the original Deepground lab. Another reference of Dirge of Cerberus is some of the unknown entity experiments. If you take a good look at the hands of these experiments, they look like Vincent's claw. So this is another reference to Dirge of Cerberus, because the thing with Vincent's claw, it's not just a claw because he just lost his arm through chaos experiment, which he did. That's another point. Vincent got the golden claw transplant because it was an original item that soldiers use. Of course, it became outdated once they figured out how to correctly make soldiers, so it was used in the Deepground experiment. So it makes sense that Vincent Valentine, since his father was the main researcher of Deepground, he founded Deepground. Of course, this is just the restrictor program. The restrictor program that Scarlet took over. But if you look at the hands of the unknown experiment, they look like Vincent's claw. It's not no accident. Like, they're really referencing and telling you that Dirge of Cerberus is part of the continuity of the remake. That Dirge of Cerberus does exist. Maybe not, sequentially, but Dirge of Cerberus does exist. And this is a direct way of telling you Dirge of Cerberus exists within the confines and continuity of the remake. And the fact in Crisis Core, and since Crisis Core now is canon, since they made a reunion version of it, it's telling you it's canon completely. So we see Nero and we see Weiss, coming in a helicopter to pick up Genesis's body to put him in the undisclosed Deepground location. Chapter 13, where we go save Wedge after Sector 7 had the plate fall on it. The underground part is the first Deepground facility. It is the first Deepground facility completely. It even looks like the other parts of Deepground. If you play Dirge of Cerberus, you got all the cages, the experiment silos, and everything as you do, and then you see references of that in Dirge of Cerberus when you go down to try to go down to Reactor 0. So, it is confirmed, and with Crisis Core Reunion confirming that, added to Chapter 13 of Final Fantasy VII Remake, it is the first place. Looking at the monsters known as unknown entity, the experiments, the very first experiments that didn't become Deepground soldiers, have the same kind of arm style as Vincent's claw. So what does that tell you? It's not an accident. Vincent Valentine is the son of the great Professor Grimoire Valentine. So, and Professor Grimoire Valentine founded the Restrictor program. Of course, you're not going to know unless you play Dirge of Cerberus Online or know of Dirge of Cerberus Online. But it's not an accident that their own son would have a soldier augmented. This was the original soldier augmented before, before they made the soldiers they did in Crisis Core. Which only Deepground would know, because Deepground was the first to use it. And if you look at Rosso, it's the same thing. Same golden claw. This is telling you, without shadow of a doubt, without it spoiling anything, without announcing the return of Vincent Valentine, the return of Genesis, and everything else, and before episode Yuffie DLC, episode intermission DLC, and the Super Weiss Super Boss, without shadow of a doubt that Dirge of Cerberus is canon. Like, pay attention to the small references. It means a lot. And I know it's like one of those people like, you love Dirge of Cerberus way too much, bud. You need to go out and touch grass and get some maidens. And that's fine. You're welcome to believe whatever you want. But it's just, I'm gonna interpret it this way because I feel that this is exactly factual based off of everything we see. In Chapter 13, it's not a secret that they put that filler in there. They had to fill up Midgar, and they couldn't just do like the original, since Midgar was short in the original Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 1 was all Midgar. They had to put something in there. And if the compilation is canon, then the padding that they put in there was actually perfect, because this references not only Crisis Core, but Dirge of Cerberus as well, in a way that it's genius. Even if they don't go in sequential order, say the Spheats die in Rebirth, still, it's smart that they did this. I still hardly doubt it. I think they're going to try and make it go straight to Advent Children and Dirge of Cerberus. But this is the before story. This Final Fantasy VII Remake timeline is different. Everything that is in the compilation mills in with the original Final Fantasy VII. So, this is why I think this is confirmed to be the first Deepground facility, because they had to put some padding in there. Not only that, but the Return of Genesis, Crisis Core Reunion, the Return of Genesis will actually link it up. He's probably going to be the next villain in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. All this is coming together, and to prove my theory is right. So, may the